The mainstream media, I heard you said yesterday on stage that they intentionally manipulate language to redefine reality.
Yes.
What is something you want people to know about how the mainstream media is kind of tricking them into believing a false reality, or how they manipulate language?
Yeah, I think this is hugely important, and it's been sort of an undercurrent in our culture for a while. It's not just in media, but it's in literature, it's in arts, it's in entertainment, it's in film, it's the way that our celebrities speak to us. Anytime you hear a celebrity say that he has, that his daughter is trans, you have to do these mental gymnastics to understand that he's actually talking about his son, and you have to go through this whole thing. And I think that it's really important to recognize how you're being manipulated with language, right down to birthing person, which is this term that even Cori Bush used in Congress when she was discussing her own difficulties with pregnancy. She couldn't even refer to herself as a woman. So it's essential to interrogate the language being used and to see how you're being manipulated. There was this wild story in NBC the other day where they were talking about pushback by GLAAD and some other groups, the Human Rights Campaign, who had swept into Florida, rounded up some families who had trans kids, so-called trans kids, and brought suit against the state for denying them puberty-blocking drugs and cross-sex hormones for minors, right? For 12-year-olds. And the mom of this 12-year-old boy was out there on the stand in federal court. She was anonymous, and she was crying about how she felt she was going to have to move her family out of state so that she could get what they called life-saving drugs. Now you look at that and you say, okay, any mom would want life-saving drugs for her kid. But then you have to interrogate that, and you have to realize that what she is crying about is that she is not able to complete the medical sex change of her 12-year-old. And then when you dig into the story, it turns out that they decided their child was trans when their child was 3 and gravitating toward girl things, right? And not wanting to wear their clothes in the car on the way to daycare at 3 years old. And this is when their pediatrician diagnosed their 3-year-old, a toddler, barely vocal, right, with gender dysphoria. So the article pulls at your heartstrings. Oh, this mom, life-saving drugs, treatment, evil Florida, how could they do this? And then you dig in and you realize that she's in fact a monster. And she wants to prescribe drugs to her child that will cause sterility, infertility, that will lead to all kinds of bad reactions. So I think that it's important to not be just pulled in by the headline and assume you know what's going on, to really interrogate and understand what is being delivered to you and question it. The left used to have this phrase when I was a kid, question authority, right? This was a whole big deal. Now we have to take that back. We have to question the authority. We have to question this language.
What would you say to people who believe that if they don't give a minor a sex change or mutilate their body, if they don't do that, it could result in the child's death?
So there's a couple of things about that, right? There are two things that they mean when they say life-saving. They mean that if the child is not allowed to undergo sex change, they will kill themselves. They mean that. That's one thing. But the other thing that they mean when they say life-saving is they mean that when the child grows up, if they have been given these drugs that make them look more like the opposite sex, they will be better able to be perceived as the opposite sex as adults, and that will help them out. So on the one hand, you have this concept of suicide, which is a huge deal. Any parent facing a kid who may be having suicidal ideation, that's absolutely terrifying, right? And that should be addressed separately from gender stuff. Because a child is having suicidal ideation, it doesn't mean that the cure is to change their sex. The cure is probably something entirely different. And the gender dysphoria is a symptom of whatever is causing these feelings of depression and meaninglessness, which I think, is a separate thing. But the concept that it is life-saving to be able to be grown up and be perceived as the opposite sex, that makes no sense. And this is something that we see repeatedly from doctors, that this is what they're going for, right? They're going for a child to grow up and look more like the opposite sex so they can better pass. That's not life-saving. And when you have a kid who feels like their life is meaningless, like they can't express themselves, and they're depressed, and they're considering suicide, you have to address the actual causes of that. You have to address this problem of meaninglessness, which I think is a cultural issue, but also give the kids some skills, help them learn something, develop confidence about who they are, not about who they might potentially be perceived as.
Why do you think that this stuff is legal in these schools? I mean, you have teachers talking to children, minors, about sexuality. This stuff is all trickled into the schools. You have parents that their kid comes home talking about wanting a sex change. A lot of this stuff is learned in the schools, or it's learned on TikTok. Studies have also shown that it's a social contagion.
I think that's real too, yeah.
So what's your reaction to that?
I think a lot of that goes back to this language manipulation. A lot of it goes back to just believing what you've been told. You have, I've had friends whose kids have undergone transition, and I say, oh, how did, I love them, how did you come up with this being your decision? Well, the doctor told me my kid was going to kill herself if I didn't go through with it, That's just, we don't know if that's true, and that is such a weird threat. So I think what happens too in schools, you've had teachers who were indoctrinated in this themselves. All the teachers go to the same grad schools. They get the same degrees in education, social emotional learning, all of this nonsense, and then they spill out into the rest of the country. And they think it's their job not to teach the kids actual skills, and actual skills are what build confidence, but they think it's their job to turn these kids into activists. We're seeing it now with trans and gender. We saw it a couple years ago with, so-called anti-racism, which is really just racism. And we see this repeatedly, that this is their goal. As soon as we're done with trans, it's going to be some new thing, right? James Lindsay is telling us it's going to be critical immigration theory is going to be the next thing. Erase yourself for the good of mankind. That's what you have to do. And I think that's a big part of it, is that this has been part of the culture for so long. Conservatives weren't paying attention. Conservatives were saying, okay, yes, I feel you are compassionate, I understand, you want to do this, I'm going to do my life, you do your life, and didn't realize that it was just this undercurrent that was going to burst forth and take over everything, including future generations.
What can people do if they're seeing all this kind of stuff take place? And as we've seen, it's been around for a while, and conservatives have ignored it, and now here it is in full force. What can people do at this point, if anything?
A couple years ago, when we were really in the throes of cancel culture and Me Too and all of these ridiculous things where, you had the weatherman, I think in Oklahoma, accidentally say a word that was just his mouth making weird sounds, and he got canceled for saying this word that was like, supposedly this racist word. I would have said, you have to take stock of your life, you have to see where you are, you have to decide if you feel comfortable that you can actually speak out and say no when your boss tells you to put pronouns in your email signature. Now I would say things have turned a corner. I think that more people are aware of how devastating this stuff is and are seeing it in their own families, in their own friend groups, and it's just, it's getting more and more personal for people. And now I would say, just say no. No, I won't put pronouns in my email signature. No, I won't refer to you as a man just because, you've decided that you want to cut your breasts off and appear male. You're still not a man. I would say no. Just reject the demand that you perceive reality different from what it is. Stand up for yourself, stand up for your family, stand up for the country, and just just do it. No, I'm not going to do that. No, you're not a man. No, you're not a woman. I will not erase mother. I will not call you a birthing person. I will not say that being white is inherently racist. I will not, say that being against illegal immigration, that's not racist. I will not capitulate to your perception, and I will refuse to be shamed by your, shifting sands of values that don't actually make any reasonable or rational sense. That's what I would say. Just stand up for yourself. And in standing up for yourself, you're standing up for all of us.